June 25, 1876, a day that would stain the American frontier in blood. George Custer rode into the valley with 600 men certain of victory. He was wrong. Within hours, his corpse lay riddled with bullets, his golden hair untouched by scalping. Why? And what about the severed heads dragged through the Sioux camp? The $2 million flag hidden under a dead soldier's body? Or the warriors who burned troopers alive as their comrades watched helplessly? This isn't the sanitized history from your textbooks. This is the gruesome truth of Little Bighorn. Stick around because what comes next will haunt you. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel to help support our community. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a figure whose reputation was built on boldness and relentless drive, commanded 5 troops of the U.S. 7th Cavalry, around 600 soldiers, into the core of this indigenous stronghold. What transpired was more than a clash of arms. It was a convergence of fates, an instant where overconfidence collided with inevitability, staining the prairie with the blood of combatants on both sides. Custer, with his long hair and unwavering bravado, was already a mythic character long before that decisive encounter. Renowned for his fearless strategies in the Civil War, he viewed the Little Bighorn mission as another chance to solidify his legend. But he misjudged the determination of the Native American leaders, rallied under chiefs like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, who battled not for fame, but for the preservation of their culture. The village along the Little Bighorn was far from a temporary camp. It was a thriving settlement of thousands, with lodges dotting the landscape, children laughing, and warriors steeling themselves to protect their kin from the advancing wave of soldiers and settlers. The 7th Cavalry, equipped with Springfield rifles and Colt pistols, rode in under orders to drive the tribes onto reservations, oblivious that they were galloping into a storm. The fighting erupted with an intensity that rattled the ground. Custer's troops, split into fragmented units, were swiftly overrun by the sheer force and skill of the native fighters. The Sioux and Cheyenne, wielding bows, spears, and seized firearms, fought with the expertise of those who had spent lifetimes mastering survival on the open plains. White Wolf, a Cheyenne fighter who witnessed the turmoil, later described the scene with somber reflection. Youths, exhilarated by triumph, rifled through the pockets of dead soldiers, uncovering strange green slips of paper, U.S. dollars, meaningless in their way of life. In a striking mix of naivety and symbolism, children repurposed the bills as tiny blankets for their clay horses, converting emblems of domination into toys. Gleaming silver coins were collected by Cheyenne craftsmen, reshaped into ornate adornments worn as emblems of their hard-won victory. Fighters such as Wooden Leg, Little Hawk, and Bobtail Horse recalled discovering whiskey bottles among the fallen troops, a grim footnote to the aftermath. The liquor, likely carried to numb the dread of war, lay broken amid the fallen, its contents seeping into the dirt. These findings were not mere scavenging but a ceremonial reclaiming, a way to assert dominance over a fight waged in defense of their land. The Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, bound by their sacred principles, followed an unspoken warrior's creed as they moved through the aftermath. Practical items were collected, currency, weapons, materials, while personal treasures revealing the soldiers' private lives remained untouched. Faded photographs, carefully folded letters, and intimate tokens from distant homes. The killing field had transformed into a grim masterpiece of sorrow. Where gentle slopes had once echoed with thundering herds and children's joyous shouts, now only the moans of dying men and the sighing prairie wind could be heard. The cavalrymen's corpses littered the landscape, their Union blue jackets shredded and darkened with gore. Their mounts lay fallen as well, massive shadows sprawled across the earth like slain behemoths. The parched, copper-colored grass appeared to weep alongside the bone-dry earth, together composing a vista of utter devastation that clutched at the soul. For the indigenous fighters, this triumph represented more than military success. It was a temporary holding back of the inevitable tide of displacement. For the 7th Cavalry, it became their last defiant gesture, evidence of what happens when human pride meets untamed wilderness. On June 27, 1876, Lieutenant Edward S. Godfrey and relief troops came upon the ghastly remains of Custer's battalion. What unfolded before their eyes was a nightmare permanently scorched into Montana's earth. Godfrey's shaken account conveyed the horror. The alabaster corpses, the dull sepia of expired cavalry mounts, and Indian ponies blanketing the terrain most densely clustered around the hill where Custer fell. The blood-caked fronds of prairie grass created jarring patterns against the bleached soil, fashioning a panorama of muted anguish. The stench of decomposition clung to everything, punctuated only by the intermittent shrieks of circling buzzards. Among the dead they identified Captain Tom Custer, the general's sibling, his remains sprawled near the hill's summit, a visceral illustration of the engagement's savagery. His features, ground into the dirt, had been rendered nearly unidentifiable by violence. The arrows protruding from his torso and cranium spoke of determined attackers. One particularly cruel projectile, its warped point fused into his skull, served as a macabre monument to the fight's ruthlessness. Though scalped, a symbolic lock had been left at his neckline, a small concession in the midst of ritual mutilation. The devastated state of Tom Custer, remembered for his courage and devotion, struck his fellow soldiers with particular force, driving home the frontier's unforgiving nature. General George Armstrong Custer was discovered nearby, his corpse standing in grim contrast to the surrounding devastation. He rested on his back with arms slightly bent and hands clasped over his abdomen, a posture so composed it might have been mistaken for a soldier catching brief respite during a campaign. His face, remarkably spared from disfigurement, showed only 2 clean wounds, a bullet hole at the left temple and another near the heart. This lack of mutilation puzzled observers, whether it signaled unexpected reverence from his foes or mere chance amid the battle's chaos remained unclear. His famous golden locks, once emblematic of his theatrical persona, lay undisturbed about features that appeared strangely tranquil despite the violence that had felled him. Young Boston Custer was recovered roughly 200 yards from Custer Hill, his corpse denuded save for plain white socks. The stitched name Boston Custer had been meticulously cut from the fabric, rendering him nameless in this sprawling burial ground. 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, another to the chest, had ended his life with brutal efficiency. Other fallen soldiers lay similarly despoiled, their uniforms stripped away, identifying marks scrupulously removed from any remaining garments. Here and there, a bloodied undergarment or torn trouser leg survived, but never with a name intact, as if the victors sought to obliterate every trace of personal identity. The tableau was one of visceral horror, a landscape of exposed, ravaged corpses, each bearing the gruesome signatures of their last agonized moments. The interment proceeded with grim urgency. Equipped only with meager tools, a few spades, shovels, axes, and even repurposed tin cups, the survivors labored to blanket their comrades with soil. The effort felt futile. Their implements were woefully inadequate for the staggering number of dead. Most bodies received only a thin veneer of earth before being abandoned to the wilderness. Hundreds of miles from kin and civilization, they remained in this untamed expanse, their presence marked solely by the lonely wails of prowling wolves. The Little Bighorn's aftermath etched itself upon both land and memory. Where prairie life once thrived, now stretched a silent necropolis, its stillness interrupted only by keening winds and the shrieks of carrion birds. Lieutenant Charles Rowe of the 2nd Cavalry would later recount an unsettling find in the abandoned indigenous encampment. A decapitated white man's head, roped with a lariat, was hauled through the village until nothing remained of its features. This ghastly spectacle underscored the conflict's merciless ferocity, where quarter was neither given nor expected. Survivor Jacob Adams later described an even more chilling sight. Cavalrymen noosed from their saddles, pulled into the heart of the encampment, bound to trees, and set ablaze as Reno's helpless troops looked on. The firelight clawing at the darkness painted the scene in a macabre glow, a tableau of triumph and retribution. The warriors scouring the battlefield uncovered more than currency and liquor. They discovered intimate relics, farewell letters to sweethearts, pocket watches frozen at the hour of death, wedding bands that would never grace another finger. The paper money worthless to them became children's playthings, crude doll blankets for their clay ponies. The silver coins, glinting with hollow allure, were reforged into ornate buckles, each one gleaming with the defiance of the victors. These objects, forged in the furnace of war, stood not as mere spoils, but as emblems of endurance, proof of a people's unbroken will to safeguard their world. Trumpeter J.P. Wernser Martini, among the handful who lived, recounted a grisly mound of corpses in a riverside gully, stacked like firewood. There lay a paymaster sergeant, his body strewn with $500 in shredded bills, money now as lifeless as the hands that once clutched it. Adjutant Cook's mutilation was noted with particular horror. One of his sideburns scalped away, flesh and hair torn as a single grotesque prize. Scout George Harrington contributed another chilling account. 4 severed heads found in the Sioux encampment, their corpses vanished, swallowed by the battle's bedlam or the sprawl of the village. Among the 5 guidons borne by Custer's men, just one survived. Concealed under Corporal John Foley's body, it told its own harrowing story. Foley, fleeing at full gallop with warriors in pursuit, had pressed his revolver to his temple and fired rather than face capture. The battle-worn standard, discovered by burial detail Sergeant Ferdinand Culbertson, was later christened the Culbertson Guidon, a poignant artifact of the conflict. Decades later, in 2010, Sotheby's auction house sold it to a private buyer for $2.2 million. This tattered banner, a relic of doomed valor, embodied both the bravery and the heartbreak of that June day. The field itself was a nightmare rendered in earth and flesh, grass clotted with gore, soil darkened by blood. The naked dead, robbed of all but their most intimate belongings, bore mute testimony to a struggle greater than a single military rout. To the native victors, it was a defiant flash of glory against an advancing tide. To the fallen cavalry, it marked the price of hubris in a territory that would not be tamed. Little Bighorn's windswept ridges and sighing grasses endure as a memorial, where 2 civilizations met in a cataclysm that stained the land and seared itself into history. So, was Custer a hero or a fool? The Sioux called it the battle where the girl saved her brother. The newspapers called it Massacre at Little Bighorn. But the $2 million flag hidden under Corporal Foley's corpse, the whiskey bottles still clutched in dead soldiers' hands, the scalps taken, and those mysteriously left untouched. This wasn't just a battle. It was a funeral for 2 worlds. Who, doctor, you, believe? Drop your theory below. We read every comment.